Hi, this is Sharon Holthouse, and I'm going to be talking about study question 2.16 or 216, nerves and tracts. The first thing that we're going to address is the difference between a neuron and a nerve. So a neuron is a single cell in the nervous system. It's a nerve cell. And we've looked at the anatomy of the neuron as far as its cell body, its dendrites, axon, etc. Alright, so single cell, a neuron. A nerve is a bundle of axons in the peripheral nervous system. So basically you've got many different axons involving many different neurons, and these axons are going to be closely associated with each other, almost in a cable-like structure, and this is called a nerve. So a nerve will travel to a certain part of the body, and it could be carrying motor information. So for example, there's a specific nerve, the musculocutaneous nerve. You don't have to know that nerve name, but that nerve specifically stimulates the biceps muscle. Okay, so there's motor information going from or through that nerve. There are other nerves that are going to carry just sensory information from a specific part of the body. And then some nerves are going to be carrying both motor and sensory information. And we'll just wait for that truck to pass. Sorry, I'm sitting on my front porch here. Alright, so that's a nerve. So if we look at this, whoops, let me go back a minute. If we look at this diagram here, you can see in this peach color is the central nervous system, the brain, and the spinal cord, and all these yellow cable-like structures following, you can see in between the ribs, and then some of them going down into the arms or down into the legs. Those are nerves. Okay, nerves versus tracts. So again, to reiterate, nerves we find in the peripheral nervous system, so bundles of axons in the PNS, and tracts are bundles of axons in the CNS, or the central nervous system. So this is a diagram that shows cross sections of the spinal cord, and then we get into the brainstem, including the medulla and the midbrain here. And what this is showing is the pathway that some of these tracts take, and in this case, this diagram is showing motor tracts. Okay, so you could see the body of this neuron here, and then you can follow these axons down. They cross over here and then continue down through the spinal cord. Okay, so tract is a bundle of axons in the central nervous system. So I know we've talked about as far as diagramming neurons, we'll sometimes show the cell body of a neuron as a circle and then show its axon as a line coming off of here. Okay, so this time you can think of that pathway involving several axons that are traveling together, bundled together in the central nervous system. So in this diagram, this is a cross-section of the spinal cord, and what this diagram shows nicely is that there are ascending tracts. These are shown on the left-hand side in red. So these are bundles of axons traveling up the spinal cord with sensory information. And there are also descending tracts. These are shown in green on the right-hand side, and those are motor tracts carrying motor information down the spinal cord. Okay, so we've got the peripheral nervous system and the central nervous system, and it's key that there's communication between both these nerves and tracts. And what happens is that there are synapses between the neurons that are traveling in the nerves and the neurons that are traveling in the tracts. So the peripheral nervous system and central nervous system work together to deliver messages from the body. Or to the body if it's motor information. Okay? Now I got a siren going here. Hopefully that's not disturbing too much. All right. So this is my cat. This is Hans. He's looks really cute and innocent here. He's actually has a very conflicted personality. But anyway, no matter what, even when he's hissing and getting a little aggressive, he has very, very soft fur. So if we go back to the previous slide, just imagine Hans here rubbing against your ankle. And he'll do that sometimes, so he'll be friendly. So his soft fur is against your leg. And you can imagine that the receptors in your skin are going to carry that information about that soft fur up your leg, okay? And once that sensory information gets to the central nervous system, the neurons in the nerve will synapse with neurons in the tracts in the central nervous system, and then that information will be carried up through the spinal cord to the brain. There'll actually be a synapse in the thalamus as well. We know that's the gatekeeper for incoming sensory information. But then the brain is going to say, oh, that's a very soft feeling on my leg. And then you'll probably say, oh, maybe I should pet that cat. And then he'll kind of nip at your hand. Anyhow, that's just one example of how there's communication between the peripheral nervous system and the central nervous system. Okay, so let's look at the tracts in a little bit more detail here. And what we want to look at is whether they are made of white or gray matter. Now if you look here at this cross section, we know that the butterfly pattern here is gray matter, so the tracts are running in the white matter. And this makes sense because we know axons are myelinated, so these information highways are going to involve white matter. And then we want to think about, are they organized or disorganized? So when we look at this diagram, you can see that there's almost little splotches or collections of pathways here, okay? And what I've shown you here on the left side with the sensory or ascending tracts is that neurons that carry pain, heat, and cold information tend to travel together, while neurons, or the axons of neurons and tracts that carry information about fine touch, pressure, and proprioception, they tend to travel back here. Okay, so this is actually a very organized system in that like information travels together. Okay, so it's not like we've got sensory information about pain being delivered by one neuron over here, and one neuron over here has got some information about pain, and another way over here. Okay, they are organized into these tracts carrying similar types of information, and the same goes for the descending or motor tracts as well. And the other question we want to answer is, do these tracts remain on one side of the central nervous system, or do they cross over to the other side? Well, here we see two different sensory tracts, and on each of these tracts, and this again, if we go back, remember that looking at the previous slide back here, fine touch, pressure, and proprioception are being carried in this posterior part of the spinal cord. Okay, so you can follow, again, these are cross sections here of the spinal cord and the brainstem, and then we have this frontal section of the brain. You can see a sensory neuron coming in here, synapses, and then it crosses over. So in other words, the opposite side of the brain is detecting sensory information from the other side of the body. Okay, now here we have the pain, heat, and cold information. So it comes in here to this spinal cord. It's going to cross over right away, synapse cross over right away, and then travel up to the brain. Okay, so this is why if someone has a stroke, if they have a stroke on the right side of the brain, it's probable, well, depending on where the stroke is, but the deficits are going to be on the left side of the body. So the opposite side of the body is affected. All right, let's look at the spinal nerves. So spinal nerves connect to the spinal cord. And if you remember, they exit through the intervertebral foramina. So think back to Unit 1 when we looked at how the vertebrae stack on each other. And between two adjacent vertebrae, there's a foramen, the intervertebral foramen, and exiting through each of those foramen is a spinal nerve. Okay, so it's connecting to the spinal cord, and these nerves are mixed, meaning they carry both sensory and motor information. Okay, so they're carrying motor information out of the spinal cord and sensory information to the spinal cord. Okay, and you can see all of these spinal nerves labeled up and down on this diagram. Now, there are 31 pairs, so there's one on each side. There's 8 cervical spinal nerves. Now you might be thinking, wait a minute, I remember there were only 7 cervical vertebrae. That's true, but this first cervical nerve comes out above C1. Okay, so that gives us room to have 8 cervical spinal nerves. We've got 12 thoracic. Then we get into the 5 lumbar, the 5 sacral, and the 1 coccygeal nerve. All right, let's look at what a dermatome is. A dermatome is an area of skin that sends sensory information to a specific spinal nerve. So you'll see here that this gentleman here is labeled with different basically spinal nerves right here, right? So here's L5, and it shows that this part of the leg is served by L5, okay? This part of the leg carries sensation from L4. L3 is right here, okay? So let's say that a physician suspected that something was wrong with someone's L5 spinal nerve. If that person had some sensory deficits in that L5 region, that might help confirm that hypothesis. All right, the next thing we're going to look at are cranial nerves. And a cranial nerve is a nerve exiting the brain. These cranial nerves are sensory, carrying incoming information, motor, carrying outgoing information, or mixed, carrying both types of information. And there are 12 pairs. Now, just to get you oriented here, this is an inferior view. So here's the frontal lobe, here's the cerebellum, here's the spinal cord, the brainstem, you can see the pons here. So basically the brain is kind of flipped upside down. You're looking at the underside of the brain. Okay, and these bright yellow structures are these different cranial nerves. You can see how they come off in pairs. So here's a cranial nerve here. There's one just like it on this side. Same here, so forth and so on. All right, so what are the cranial nerves? The first one is the olfactory nerve. This is a sensory nerve, and it deals with our sense of smell. And this is a frontal section here, and I just wanted to show you the orientation. Here's the frontal bone. This is the frontal sinus. This is the nasal cavity. And if you remember the cribriform plate from skeletal anatomy, all those little holes, these little olfactory nerve endings are carrying sensory, the sense of smell, odor information basically to this olfactory bulb, and then that's carried to the brain. Okay, so that's the olfactory nerve, number one. And it's just by convention, these nerves are called like cranial nerve number one, cranial nerve number two. I'm not sure the history of that, but that's kind of the conventional way of naming them. All right, the optic nerve is right here, one on each side. And you saw that optic nerve when you did your sheep eye dissection. And basically there are sensory photoreceptors in the retina that sense light, and then the information is carried through the optic nerve. So this optic nerve contributes to our sense of vision. All right, and we have the number three, oculomotor nerve. This is primarily a motor nerve. It involves movement of the eye. So if you move your eyes up and down, and actually to moving your eyes towards your nose, that's involved with the oculomotor nerve. Eyelid elevation, so opening the eyelid, okay, and pupil constriction, narrowing the pupil of the eye. So you can see the oculomotor nerve coming off the brain and then going to some of these different muscles, extrinsic eye muscles that help control movements of the eyeball. And that helps us with our focus as well as rolling our eyes and looking in different directions. Okay, the trochlear nerve, number 4, is a motor nerve primarily, and it deals with eye movement. It goes to one of the extrinsic eye muscles, so it's not, it doesn't have as big of a role as the oculomotor nerve, but an important one here in eye movement. All right, number 5 here is the trigeminal nerve. It's mixed. It has to do with our ability to chew. Okay, so when I say mixed, I mean it has motor and sensory functions. So chewing would be a motor function. And then it also involves with our sense of touch and pain and temperature on the parts of the face, also in the mouth, including the gums and the teeth. And you can see how extensive that trigeminal nerve is. It has quite a few branches that go to different parts of the face, and then here coming down in, to where it would serve the mouth and then the gums and the teeth. Number 6 is the abducens nerve. This is a motor nerve, and it contributes to eye movement as well. And you can see it coming off of the brainstem here and then going to one of those eye muscles. All right, on to number 7. This is the facial nerve. And this is mixed, meaning again sensory and motor functions. As far as motor, it is included in facial expression, and again this has quite an extensive amount of branching, so it's going to go to a lot of the muscles that help us show our different emotions, our facial expressions. Saliva and tear production, also involved with the facial nerve. Sensory component is taste. The vestibulocochlear nerve, number 8, is involved in sensory, and this vestibulocochlear nerve, when we look at the study of the ear, you're going to be very familiar with these different areas, but you can see that going to the cochlea, this is where its role in our sense of hearing is going to come into play, and then going to these semicircular canals, that's where its role in balance is going to come into play. Moving right along to number 9, the glossopharyngeal nerve. This is also motor and sensory functions. And whoa, wait a minute here. Let me just get back on track here. Sorry about that. Okay, the glossopharyngeal nerve is also mixed. It's involved with taste, sense of taste, and also saliva production. And that's shown down here. Okay. What I wanted to show you with this diagram is the vagus nerve, number 10. This nerve has very, very extensive innervation throughout the body. Again, sensory and motor, so sensation from the thoracic organs, including the lungs and the heart, as well as the abdominal organs, okay, down in here. There's a motor component as far as contraction and secretion of the different digestive organs, the stomach, the intestines, secretion from different juices, for example, the bile, the juices in the stomach, etc. So vagus nerve plays a big role there, and also in breath and heart rate as well. Okay, going on to number 11, this is the accessory nerve that's mostly motor information, and it allows for head, neck, and shoulder movements, and it also has a component in swallowing. It's kind of interesting, the accessory nerve, not too long ago, it was found that its fibers actually arise from the spinal cord, but its pathway makes it appear like it's coming from the brain. So it's strictly not a cranial nerve, but it's been classified that way for so long that as a matter of just study and convention, we still call this accessory nerve number 11 a cranial nerve, even though technically or strictly it comes off the spinal cord. 12 is a hypoglossal nerve. It has motor function and it involves tongue movement. So our tongue movements that help us speak, move the food around in our mouth, that is controlled by the hypoglossal nerve. 12 is a hypoglossal nerve. So this is one mnemonic that you can use for memorizing cranial nerves. So each of the first letters of these words, and then both of these letters of ah, correspond with the cranial nerves, starting with number 1 going through number 12. So O, to touch and feel, very good. Velvet, ah. So that may help you memorize those nerves, and I hope you have a great day. I'll see you soon. Thanks, bye.